They say weddings are supposed to be about joy, family, and celebration. But as I stood outside the venue, holding a plain white envelope that had no invitation inside, just silence and absence, I realized my parents had made their decision very clear. My presence was not welcome. The text had been short, almost casual, as though tossing me aside required no more effort than ordering groceries. "Don't come. It's better this way. Your sister deserves her day." It's funny how family can reduce you to an inconvenience with just 12 words. I could have argued, I could have begged, I could have insisted that as the eldest daughter, I deserved to be there, standing beside my sister as she stepped into her new life. But instead I vanished, quietly, almost obediently, like I had done so many times before. And yet, as I walked away from the grand hall, the smell of roses and expensive perfume trailing behind me, I couldn't help but think, wasn't this my story too? Weren't all those years of sacrifice, all those compromises I had made, the unspoken bricks that had built this family? But no one sees the bricks. They only see the pretty house. The thing about family rejection is that it doesn't always come in dramatic outbursts or slammed doors. Sometimes it's in the casual omission. The photos you're cropped out of, the conversations that trail off when you enter the room, the celebrations you're told you'd only ruin by attending. And so, here I was, unwanted at my sister's wedding, dismissed by my own parents, walking alone down a quiet street while laughter echoed from behind me. But if you rewind my life, if you peel back the layers of years and sacrifices, you'll see why this moment mattered so much. Why this quiet exile wasn't just about missing a wedding, it was about erasure. It was about being told that despite everything, I was still the wrong piece in the family puzzle. And maybe, just maybe, this was the last time I'd let myself be erased. Because behind the silence was a story no one wanted to tell. A story about struggle, sacrifice, and the way families sometimes crown one child while quietly burying another. And if they didn't want me at the wedding, fine. But they couldn't stop me from finally telling the truth. I wasn't born into privilege, but I was born into duty. The eldest child in a family that seemed to believe firstborns were created to carry everyone else's weight. From the moment I could walk, I wasn't just a daughter, I was a caretaker. While my friends played with dolls, I learned how to rock a colicky baby to sleep. My sister bundled in my skinny arms while my parents worked late shifts. I was 8 years old the first time I stayed up all night making sure the bottles were washed, the homework was done, and the house was ready for my parents to collapse into when they came home. School should have been my sanctuary. Instead, it became another battlefield. I was smart, too smart maybe, and my teachers told me I had potential. But potential doesn't pay bills, and so by the time I was 15, I was working part-time jobs, my weekends spent behind cash registers. Instead of at birthday parties, every dollar I made was swallowed by the family machine. My shoes had holes in them, but my sister had new ones. My textbooks were borrowed, but my brother had the latest toys. I told myself it was fine. That's what older siblings did. That's what love looked like. But love, I would learn, is a dangerous currency when it's not returned. There's a special kind of pain that comes from being the silent backbone. People step on you, lean on you, take from you, and then forget you were ever there. The years rolled by in a blur of exhaustion. When my sister turned 16, she had a sweet 16 party with balloons, cake, and a shiny necklace as a gift. At 16, I had already given up on the idea of college because my parents said, "We can't afford it, and you need to help at home." Sacrifice became my second skin. I didn't fight it. I didn't know how. Instead, I learned to smile through it, to make jokes about being the second mom of the family. People laughed, thinking I was exaggerating, but deep down, I was crumbling. And then came the years of invisibility. My sister bloomed into the golden child, pretty, outgoing, full of charm. My parents adored her. Every success of hers was celebrated, photographed, and paraded. And me? I was just the shadow that made her shine brighter. It wasn't jealousy, not really. It was grief. Grief for the childhood I never had. Grief for the woman I could have been if I hadn't been trapped under the weight of duty. But the hardest part? I believed them. I believed that I was less, that my worth was tied to how much I could give up, how invisible I could become. And so, when the wedding day came, and they told me not to come, it wasn't the first time they had erased me. It was just the first time I realized how much it hurt. The days after my sister's wedding felt strangely hollow. For the first time in years, there was nothing left for me to plan, no one left for me to shield. My family had made it abundantly clear they didn't need me anymore. Or maybe they never did. They just needed the work I could do, the silence I could provide. I thought about disappearing entirely, moving to another city, starting fresh. But how does someone with no savings, no degree, and no real support system simply start fresh? I was 32, and all I had to show for my life was a resume full of low-wage jobs and a back bent from carrying too much. And yet, life has a cruel way of dangling threads of possibility just when you've given up on weaving anything new. It began at the office. I worked nights as a janitor for a mid-sized financial firm, the kind of job no one noticed, no one respected, but it kept the lights on. Cleaning conference rooms, emptying trash bins, wiping fingerprints off glass doors. It was monotonous, invisible work, fitting, really. One evening, while polishing the table in conference room C, I noticed a laptop left open. Normally, I ignored those things. Boundaries were a rule I clung to. I didn't pry, didn't snoop, didn't give anyone a reason to accuse me of being where I didn't belong. But that night, something caught my eye. On the glowing screen were words that didn't sit right. Q4 adjustments, shift totals, align narrative. My breath caught. Adjust totals? Align narrative? I might not have a degree in finance, but years of scrubbing trash bins teaches you more than just which cleaning spray works best. I had overheard enough, seen enough spreadsheets left behind, to know that this wasn't normal accounting language. And curiosity, well, it's a dangerous thing. For the first time in years, I didn't suppress it. I leaned in, scanning the file. Numbers shifted in ways that seemed deliberate, not mistaken. My pulse quickened. Against every instinct screaming, "Don't get involved," I pulled out my phone and snapped a photo. That night, I barely slept. I pored over the blurry screenshot, cross-referencing it with scraps of overheard conversations and discarded printouts I'd seen in the recycling bin. And slowly, a picture emerged. Someone was cooking the books. Someone was lying. And not by accident, by millions. I had stumbled onto something big. But with that discovery came a storm of fear. What was I supposed to do with it? I was a janitor, not an auditor. Who would believe me? Worse, what if they found out I snooped? People like me don't get second chances. We get fired, blacklisted, discarded. Still, the thought gnawed at me. If I stayed quiet, I would be exactly who my family believed I was, someone meant to endure, not to act, invisible, replaceable. And then came the second crack in the wall. Week later, during a routine night shift, I ran into Elaine, one of the senior accountants who often stayed late. She was different from the others, less polished, more human. She would sometimes smile at me, sometimes ask how my night was going. That night she looked exhausted, her blazer crumpled, her eyes shadowed. "You ever feel like the walls are closing in?" she muttered, more to herself than to me. I froze, mop in hand. She wasn't talking to me, surely. But then she glanced up, her eyes heavy. This place, it eats people alive. There was something in her tone that made me want to speak. Against my usual instinct, I said softly. Or maybe it just chews up the ones who keep quiet. Her gaze sharpened. For a second, I thought I'd gone too far. But then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. That was the first time I realized. Wasn't the only one suffocating under silence. Over the next few weeks, Elaine and I formed a strange, cautious friendship. We never spoke openly about the files or the numbers, but there was an unspoken current between us. She knew things weren't clean, and I knew she knew. She had more to lose than I did, though. A mortgage, kids in school, a reputation. One night, when we found ourselves alone in the elevator, she whispered, "They're shifting money. Offshore accounts. It's bad. I've been told to look the other way." Her voice trembled, not with ignorance, but with fear. I wanted to ask why she didn't blow the whistle, but I already knew the answer. Fear chains you, just as effectively as duty had chained me to my family. That night, I went home and stared at the ceiling until dawn. My whole life had been a cycle of silence. Silent sacrifice for my siblings, silent labor for my parents, silent work in a job no one noticed. And now I was staring at silence again, in the face of corruption. But maybe this time I could break it. Of course, breaking silence comes with risks. I could lose my job, my only income. Worse, if I exposed something without proof, I could be sued, crushed, under the very machine I was trying to fight. And yet, what was left to lose? My family had already cut me out. My life, as it was, had already been stripped bare. I thought of my sister in her wedding gown, radiant, adored, while I stood outside like a ghost. And I thought, maybe this was my wedding, too. Not to a man, not to a future of roses and applause, but to myself. To the woman I could become if I stopped disappearing. So I began a plan. Small, quiet, dangerous. Collect scraps of evidence, screenshots, printouts, accidentally pulled from recycling, whispered fragments from late-night hallways. Piece by piece, I stitched together the story no one wanted told. But every step I took, the stakes rose higher. I noticed new eyes on me in the office, conversations that stopped when I entered. Elaine grew distant, skittish, as though she feared being tied to me. And one night, I came back to my locker to find it slightly ajar, though I knew I'd locked it. Someone knew. I wasn't just risking my job anymore. I was risking everything. And yet, strangely, I felt alive for the first time in years. The day it all came crashing down wasn't planned. Not exactly. I had been gathering scraps of evidence for weeks, screenshots, discarded memos, half-shredded documents pieced together at my kitchen table like puzzles. It was dangerous, reckless even, but I couldn't stop. I had crossed the line from survival into defiance, and there was no turning back. The tension finally snapped on a gray Tuesday morning. I had just finished scrubbing the marble lobby when I heard a buzz of voices down the hall. A closed-door meeting. Board members, executives, and the CFO himself were in attendance. Something in me, call it courage, call it insanity, pulled me toward that room. I wasn't supposed to be there. People like me stayed invisible in the hallways, heads down, blending into the wallpaper, but that morning I carried a folder tucked under my arm, 30 pages of proof. And for once in my life, I wasn't going to disappear. I pushed the door open. The room froze. Expensive suits, polished shoes, a table longer than my entire apartment. At the far end sat Mr. Langford, the CFO, his silver hair perfectly in place, his eyes narrowing the moment he saw me. "Excuse me," he barked, his tone dripping with annoyance. "This is a closed meeting." I swallowed the lump in my throat. My palms were slick with sweat. Every instinct screamed at me to back out, to apologize, to vanish like I always had. But instead I stepped forward. "You might want to open it." A ripple of chuckles broke around the table. One executive leaned back, smirking, as if this interruption was comedy relief. Another whispered something under his breath, and the whole table shook with restrained laughter. The janitor had spoken. How amusing. Miss... Langford's voice oozed disdain. If you have something to say, I suggest you schedule an appointment with HR. The humiliation burned through me like fire. I could feel their eyes stripping me down, reducing me to nothing. And for a moment, I almost crumbled. But then, I remembered my sister's wedding, the text that said I wasn't good enough to stand beside her. My parents' silence. Years of erasure. Not anymore. I pulled the folder from under my arm and dropped it onto the polished mahogany table. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Paper spilled out, numbers, notes, screenshots, and reconstructed spreadsheets. This, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, is your missing $4.2 million, shifted offshore, hidden and falsified in quarterly reports. The laughter stopped. Langford's jaw tightened. His hand twitched toward the folder, then stopped, as though touching it would burn. Around the table, faces shifted from mockery to alarm, from amusement to fear. One man cleared his throat. That's a serious accusation. It's not an accusation, I snapped. It's evidence. I've already sent copies to the IRS, the SEC, and a journalist at Channel 7. This, I tapped the stack of papers, is just for your records. Silence. For the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I was the epicenter of the room. Langford leaned back, his face turning an ugly shade of red. You don't know what you're talking about. You're just a janitor. The words hung in the air. Just a janitor. The phrase that had defined me, diminished me, chained me, but this time I smiled. Funny, I said, how being just a janitor gave me the perfect view. I see the things you leave behind. I clean up the messes you try to hide. Turns out, invisibility has its advantages. Gasps rippled around the table. A couple of board members leaned forward, scanning the documents with widening eyes. One woman, sharp and impeccably dressed, shot Langford a look that could slice steel. The CFO sputtered, his authority crumbling before my eyes. This is nonsense, fabricated. She doesn't have credentials. But credentials didn't matter anymore. The truth was already out of his control. I gathered the remaining papers, sliding them neatly back into the folder. Don't worry. Like I said, this isn't just staying in this room. I turned to leave, my legs trembling but my back straight. Wait, someone called after me. It was Elaine, standing at the far end of the table, her face pale but resolute. For weeks she had been silent, afraid to act. But now, with the evidence laid bare, something in her broke free. She's right, Elaine said, her voice carrying, through the stunned silence. I've seen it too. I have emails. I can back this up. The room erupted. Voices clashed. Accusations, denials, demands. Langford slammed his hand against the table, but the authority he once wielded had slipped through his fingers. I didn't stay to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I had already delivered the blow. As I stepped into the hallway, my heart pounded in my chest like a drum. My knees threatened to give out. But my spirit had never stood taller. That was the day I stopped being invisible. That was the day the janitor became the most powerful person in the room, and for the first time in my life, I walked away, not erased, not forgotten, but undeniable. The aftermath was not instant fireworks. It was slow, messy, and at times frightening. Exposing fraud at a multi-million-dollar firm meant lawyers, investigations, and endless questions from government officials. For weeks, my stomach twisted every time the phone rang. But beneath the fear was something stronger, relief. For the first time in my life, silence wasn't my burden. It was theirs. Langford, the CFO, was removed within days. His empire of polished lies collapsed under the weight of numbers he couldn't deny. News anchors splashed his face across screens. Reporters whispered about the anonymous source, and regulators swooped in with audits that tore open years of deceit. And me? I thought I'd be swallowed up in the chaos, trampled under lawsuits or threats. Instead, something unexpected happened. The firm offered me a deal. They wanted me gone quietly, without media fanfare. A generous settlement, more money than I'd ever seen in my life, in exchange for discretion. For a long moment, I considered taking it and running, disappearing into a small apartment far from here, finally free. But disappearing was what I had done my whole life. And I was done disappearing. So I negotiated. Not for more money, but for something they never expected. A letter officially recognizing my role in uncovering the fraud. A record. Proof. I didn't want wealth alone. I wanted acknowledgement. I wanted my existence, my effort, written down so no one could erase it again. When the settlement cleared, I didn't buy luxury or flash. I bought freedom. I rented a small office downtown, second-hand furniture and a dented filing cabinet, and hung a simple sign on the door. Integrity Forensics, Financial Truth Consulting. It sounded grand, but really, it was just me with a laptop and a lifetime of observation. Still, word spread faster than I imagined. Companies called, nonprofits called, even small businesses struggling with shady bookkeeping called. They didn't care about my degrees. They cared about my eye for detail, my persistence, my refusal to look away. Soon I had more work than I could handle. And with that work came something even more precious: purpose. I began hiring women like me, women who had been overlooked, underestimated, silenced. A single mom who had worked as a cashier for 20 years, a refugee who had cleaned houses while studying English at night, a retired secretary who thought her skills no longer mattered. I trained them, mentored them, and gave them something my own life had been starved of: a chance to be visible. And one day, months later, as I stood in that tiny office buzzing with energy, I realized I wasn't just building a business. I was building a mirror of everything I had been denied. A place where sacrifice wasn't swallowed in silence, where voices were not just heard but amplified. Recognition came in waves. A local newspaper ran a feature: From Janitor to Justice Seeker. The headline embarrassed me, but when I saw the pride in my team's eyes, I didn't hide. For once, I stood in the light, and then came the phone call I never expected. It was my sister. Married now, settled, her life polished and perfect. She spoke awkwardly, fumbling over words until finally she said, I saw you on the news. You did something incredible. Mom and Dad, they don't know what to say. I wanted anger to rise. I wanted to spit back all the years of being erased, the wedding I was barred from, the sacrifices they never saw. But instead, what I felt was peace, because I didn't need their validation anymore. I wasn't the forgotten eldest daughter, the invisible shadow propping up their dreams. I was Ruth, the woman who had broken silence, who had built something of her own. I'm glad you called, I told her simply, and that was enough. Now, when I walk into rooms, people don't look past me. They lean in, they listen. Not because I'm loud, not because I'm wealthy, but because I carry the kind of presence you can't ignore once you've learned to claim it. I'm not chasing revenge, and I don't flaunt success. My joy is quieter than that, more grounded. It's in mentoring a young woman who once thought she was destined for nothing more than survival and watching her stand tall in a boardroom. It's in knowing that invisibility, the cloak I wore for so long, has become my greatest strength. Because when you've been unseen, you learn to see everything. And today, I am not unseen. I am undeniable. They once called me just a janitor, but here's the truth. I had been cleaning up other people's messes my whole life. Not just spilled coffee or dusty desks, but financial messes, emotional messes, the chaos families leave on the shoulders of their quietest child. For years, I believed invisibility was my curse, that if no one saw me, no one valued me. But invisibility had been shaping me all along. While others performed in the spotlight, I was learning in the shadows, watching, listening, noticing the things everyone else overlooked. And when the moment came, the one moment that truly mattered, it was invisibility that gave me the power to act, because no one expected it. No one saw me coming. What I learned is this: silence is not weakness. It's stored energy, and if you use it wisely, it can shatter the loudest lies. Today, people ask if I'm proud of bringing down a corrupt CFO, but that was never my goal. My real victory was claiming myself, no longer erased, no longer the sister who shouldn't show up, no longer a ghost at my own life's table. The twist? My legacy isn't just about what I exposed, it's about what I built. The young, women I mentor, the overlooked voices I amplify, the lives reshaped because I refused to keep my head down. Just last month, one of my trainees stood in court as an expert witness, dismantling fraud with the same quiet confidence I once thought impossible for myself. When she finished, she turned to me and whispered, "I never thought I could be this person, but you showed me I could." That moment meant more than any settlement, any headline, because the cycle broke. So I ask you, how many Ruths are out there right now? How many women, men, workers, caretakers are silently holding families, businesses, communities together, and yet are treated as if they're invisible? The next time you pass by someone who seems small, someone you think doesn't matter, look closer. Because sometimes the quietest woman in the room is the one who saves it. And maybe the most powerful revenge is not revenge at all, but simply living so fully that you can never again be ignored. My name is Ruth. I was once invisible. Now, I am undeniable. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories and new videos.